So back at Hofstra, and what's turning out to be kind of a wacky day. Took me a while to get here, as the trains were delayed, and dropped off my daughter Sophia at the Jamaica station, but I made it here in the end and just taught a class on Jacques Rancière. That was pretty good, actually. And then I came in to record my meditation, and as I was going through the material and trying to correlate it with being and learning, the book that was ultimately published, the material that was originally made daily and then put into these binders. Here's the green binder, the famous green binder, and then there's a maroon binder. At any rate, yeah, I was correlating what was, meditation to being and learning, and I've been sort of, saying that, well, I'm reading this material, and that ultimately was these page numbers. Well, it turns out that the material that appears from 4:20, so everything between 4:20, which was Sunday, and half of the meditation on 4:26 is not in being and learning. Which is just, I have no answer for that. I really don't. The last sentence of chapter 4 in Being and Learning is the material that is on the conclusion of the meditation from 4:19. Thus, the releasement to learning is depicted as, in some ways, a lingering of imposition as the last remnants of the asymmetrical relation, which nevertheless help bring about the birth of freedom, the releasement into learning. Then everything, 4:20, which was Sunday, and which I read 2 days ago, and then 4:21, which I read yesterday, and then the material that I'm about to read today, and then which is the 22nd, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and not until midway into the meditation of 26 does Being and Learning. So there's a whole section that did not appear in the book, and I don't know how that happened. It ends there. It's very strange. It's very strange. This whole project is kind of odd, and I hope no one's making judgments about it. I mean, rather to say dismiss it because of this kind of this quality that it has, that it seems to be a work that lives outside of the author. Something that would make the Russian literary critic Mikhail Bakhtin smile, I suppose, because for him that's the way things work, So this book, for sure, has a life beyond me. I guess that's the point of the writing and the experiment. It's just all about conveying and describing what appears. But this is just a strange mystery to me, that all this stuff that I wrote, pages and pages, somehow was dropped out. Now I can imagine that I edited it, the final edit, it just was omitted, but that's why I'm doing this commemoration, to get it straight and to get clarity on what it is that I wrote, to read this thing through day to day in the way that I wrote it, to commemorate the material, and then to make a commentary on it. So anyway, moving forward then, what I'm reading again is not in Being and Learning, so this is additional material that did not find its way into the final book Being and Learning. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. Yesterday, picking it up where I left off yesterday, which has to do with the disposition of the sage, the disposition of the one who emancipates. So in a way, it was sort of anticipating what we talked about today in my class with Rancière, although we really didn't get too much into emancipation and all that. We did mostly a critical reading of Rancière. Anyway, yesterday's meditation culminated with a quotation from Heidegger, which incorporates the notion of disposition. And Heidegger writes, I put it in the context of the sparing, so going back to the idea of the truth of concealment as sparing freedom. So the sentence begins, the sparing as an offering which frees, quote, is the disposition that transports us into this or that basic relation to beings as such. More precisely, disposition is what transports us in such a way that co-founds the time-space of the transporting itself. We cannot yet ask how this transporting is to be understood, but this question is an essential track within our question of openness as such. So the relationship between disposition, being disposed to, and openness is key. So picking it up then, this day, the 22nd of April, Earth Day, as it's celebrated, reading material that did not find its way into the final published material that was published as the book, Being and Learning. Somewhere in between chapters 4 and 5, this material exists. The reception of the disposition is fulfilled after the liberated one has become accustomed to the open region, and he experiences the sublime revelation. At this moment he can see the truth of appearance as shining forth of being. Quote, and now he would begin to draw the conclusion that it is the sun that produces the seasons and the course of the year and controls everything in the visible world, and moreover is in a way the cause of all that he and his companions used to see. Then if he called to mind his fellow prisoners and what passed for wisdom in his former dwelling place, he would sure think himself happy in the change and be sorry for them. Quote, and unquote. That's from the allegory. He has now become disposed to understand the truth of appearance, but the outcome of the revelation is the longing to gather together with his companions. This longing represents the authentic reception of the offering from the sage, for it implies the awakening of the truth of relationality as the foundation of learning. To learn is to think alongside and with others. It is a dialogic process that requires the company of others. The liberated one's happiness is incomplete. He requires companions. Above, in our initial hearing of the story, we suggested that the longing represents a recalling as a recollection, a remembering as a bringing back together. We suggested that this recollection is the silent calling of his companions, which initiates the final turning that return back to his former abode. This longing is the transformed desire that welled up in the first moment of disorientation, and had driven him to take shelter in his former place in the cave. He had to be restrained by his guide, but here, at the completion of his revelation, he is free to return to the cave. And it is the very freedom he has been released into that compels him to return to his former companions to seek their fellowship in the open region. He will return as the potential guide, as the one who will bring the news and offer it as a sparing, as a releasement. He has now become an apprentice, a learner, one who can bear the message of the sage. This message is offered in the evocative speech of poetic saying, a speaking that stands apart from the communication in the cave. When he recalls his companions, he remembers the form and content of the cave dweller's speech. Quote, they may have had a practice of honoring and commending one another with the prizes for the man who had the keenest eye for the passing shadows and the best memory for the order in which they followed or accompanied one another, so that he could make good guess as to which was going to come next. Unquote. We must be careful here, however, not to become confused by the transformation depicted here in the allegory. If the tale is showing us, as Heidegger suggests, how the essence of learning is related to and grounded in the essence of truth, then it is offering to show how learning, like truth, is rooted in the twofold play of concealment and unconcealment. Above we said the liberated one is happy for his change, but sorry for his friends who remain below. We said that he will return with the news of his journey and with the hope that they too will want to join him. He returns seeking their companionship for fellowship, so that they might together wander through and explore this world that exists above and beyond the cave. It is with a mixture of joy and pity that he returns below to his companions, bearing the news of this world that he has been revealed to him. But to whom will he bring the news? This question is posed so that we can think through the role of the sage and the formation of the community of learners, while acknowledging the preparatory stage as necessary. It would be a misunderstanding to identify the return to the cave as motivated by a desire to liberate all the captives. The story is ambiguous on this point, and this has established the so-called two worlds reading of the tale that is handed down as the appropriate way to hear it. The traditional reading renders the cave a realm of untruth and has no sense of the twofold play between the truth of concealment and the truth of appearance. In the reading we are offering, the twofold play appears as the moments of preparation, education, and freedom, learning, as the conservation and liberation of natality. The two-world reading renders the cave a realm of untruth because truth is reduced to the truth of appearance. Heidegger cautions us against such embracing this reading, which has the implication of rendering static the dynamic process of learning. Misleading in his own reading is Heidegger's suggestion that the story clarifies, quote, the essence of paideia as the constant overcoming of lack of education, unquote. The transformations or turnings, however, are not an overcoming of a lack, but an actualization of the possibility that has been preserved. The not yet contained in natality and realized in the creative acts unfolding in the reciprocal exchange of poetic dialogue is not a lack in the sense of being without or having less than necessary. Rather than being an overcoming of a lack, the process of learning is the reception of the gift of teachability that does not fill but fulfills. Paideia is thus the completion of the promise, the entrustment, the bringing of completion of the preservation of natality. This completion is fulfilled when the evocative speech evokes wonder and thereby turns around. But as we have suggested, only ones who are ready or prepared to hear the saying will hear the saying as evocative. So we concur with Heidegger that the traditional reading has propelled the one-sided depiction of truth, but part company with his take on paideia as akin to the filling of a vessel, what Paulo Freire would call banking education. Quote, hence, the telling of the story does not end, as is often supposed, with the description of the highest level attained in the ascent out of the cave. On the contrary, the allegory includes the story of the descent of the freed person back into the cave, back to those who are still in chains. Quote from Heidegger, and that's how it ends. So I have to say I'm filled with a little bit of sort of cognitive dissonance, a feeling of uncertainty, because I'm just wondering how it was that this material fell out of the final published text, and I suppose I'm sort of anxious to see if there is more of the same. So far, it's been pretty much following along with the book, and so again, it's just odd to me. It's odd that it happens at the end of chapter 4. There's really no rhyme or reason to it. I mean, this is all still continuing on with the allegory, and it is just more of the conversation. It doesn't affect the move that's made, and it's all I can say thus far. It's the only case where there's some real editing that went on, insofar as the process by which this was published. But I'm going to confess, and it's one of the reasons I'm doing this commemoration, is that the whole way that this thing unfolded, a year of writing every day, completed, and then out of exhaustion put aside. That's not the only reason it was put aside. It was also put aside because when I completed it and shared copies of the manuscript, I got no response. People, colleagues and friends, friends that are colleagues, the ones I sent them to, not a one read anything, or had anything to say. It was and remains this kind of overwhelming task to read this material, because you really have to sit with it in the way that I'm doing it now. So completed it, put it aside out of exhaustion, out of also a feeling of somewhat of what is it, discouragement, and I don't want to say demoralization, that's too strong a word, but really not even knowing what it is that I did. And really it sat on that shelf right behind me, right over there, right there. The two binders sat for growing, for years, literally for years. 2005, 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009. It wasn't until 2010, which was an important year of my life personally, that is the birth of my son Jamie, is the principal thing that happened in 2010, that I really decided that I needed to go back to this material and I needed to do something with it. But in the time in between, I mean, there was an attempt to publish some of the material, and it did. My late colleague Ilan Gurziev was one of the few people that really paid attention to this material, and he published part of it. But for the most part, between 2005 and 2010, so a good 5 years, it's lay dormant. And so when I picked it up again and read through it and was editing it, I was really just looking for obvious typos and certain breaks where there should be a paragraph. And so, when I look back, I see just the most basic corrections. But there really wasn't a reading of it. And that's why I'm doing this 10 years later, because I have yet to really go through, read every meditation thoughtfully and carefully, and give a commentary on it. So that's a meta-commentary, all on the feeling I have after discovering that this whole section of material is not present in Being and Learning. And in terms of what I wrote on the 22nd of April, again, I think I'm just overwhelmed by the feeling that this is not in the book. But yeah, a lot of this is just kind of going back and repeating the sense of, well, on the one hand, why it's so important to reimagine the allegory within the context of being and learning. That is to say, the relationship between being and learning, and why it's necessary for us to sort of redeem the cave and to disrupt that inherited way of retelling and hearing the story as one in which the cave is, this sphere of oppression and this place where a kind of bad education is happening, or the improper one, and that then from the moment of emancipation outward you have all that is good, culminating with the contemplation of the good symbolizing the sun. So what I'm repeating in this meditation is the need to reimagine it, and to see the cave and the open as two sides of the twofold play. So that on the one hand we have the truth of concealment, the necessity of the boundaries, the necessity of being held back, the necessity of having one's natality, as Aran puts it, conserved. And then at the same time, when one goes through the process of emancipation and one is moving in the open region, the other side of that truth of disclosure, or the truth of appearance, and the enactment of freedom, so the doing something with one's natality now conserved, that there's also a boundedness of this too. So the truth of concealment is present with the truth of disclosure, insofar as freedom is always something that ought to be directed. So there's this imperative that comes with the offering, and the imperative is sort of like the echo of the truth of concealment as the truth of structure, if you will, or the truth of the truth of boundedness, right, or boundaries. So I think this is key in the reimagination, so that there isn't this making of hierarchy, but there's a relationship, an essential relationship with the roots, if you will, and the past in particular, and the future, and what's unfolding, sort of being disclosed or blossoming or flowering. So freedom and the enactment of freedom is happening above the ground. It's always related to what is below the ground, right? And so this meditation is sort of recalling that important point, and it's also emphasizing the sense in which that twofold play, and particularly the sense of being bound, right, the truth of being bound and having boundaries, and being binded, works its way out through relationality, right? So that we're always in relationship, right, to others and to the world. So once again, overwhelmed by the kind of dissonance of recognizing that a whole chunk of material is not in being and learning, and working from there.